there, everybody. My name's Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist, and welcome back to my channel. We are officially in the week of Halloween now. This is Monday when I'm recording this. I'm hoping I get it up to you guys on Monday or at least Tuesday morning. So, as with the rest of my videos this week, we are focused on Halloween and all the elements of the holiday. So, today, I wanted to have a discussion with you guys about the villain layers. We can call them layers, we can call them hideouts, we can call them bases, we can call them homes, whatever term you wish to use. But this is where your villain spends their time. This is where they plot their plans. This is where they gather their minions. This is where they live, essentially. And I think they are very interesting because they all seem to have similar traits in common, even though it varies over the genres. So, what am I talking about exactly? Well, first and foremost, most villain bases tend to be surrounded by inhospitable territory. And by that, I mean, I'll let Boromir explain this one.
One does not simply walk into Mordor. Its black gates are guarded by more than just orcs. There is evil there that does not sleep. And the great eye is ever watchful. It is a barren wasteland, riddled with fire and ash and dust. The very air you breathe is a poisonous fume. Not with 10,000 men could you do this. It is folly.
And then, of course, you have the traditional villain's castle, like in Sleeping Beauty, which is one of my favorites.
Maleficent! She's got Prince Philip at the Forbidden Mountain. But we can't go there. We can, and we must.
And the thing that these all have in common is that they are surrounded by land and obstacles that make it difficult to get to. And in my opinion, this is essentially a villain version of a moat. It is primarily there for defense. Because most of the time, villains in stories, they're not stupid. They don't generally become the big bad of your story if they don't have a lot of intelligence. So if you're planning something in a story that your hero or group of characters is going to oppose, then you're not necessarily going to be out in the open about it without some security about you. And I think that the thing that varies about it is just what form does the security take. If you look at traditional fairy tales or like quest-like fairy tales or stories, then you're usually going to see like the Mordor-ish type of landscape, or like the Forbidden Castle type of landscape, where the castle is usually isolated by itself, but it's surrounded by either a moat, volcanic activity, armies, bushes with spines, rocky mountains, all kinds of things that are not easy to get through. And that is serving the same function that a moat does, which is to make it difficult to access. And then you have the element of this is usually where your villain is gathering the crux of their forces. This is where they're going to have either, if not the bulk of their armies, they're going to have their best fighters, they're going to have their most powerful wizards, things like that. Because the purpose of a castle, honestly, is in the keep. And the keep is where the royal family or noble family would go during raids and sieges, because it was in the deepest part of the castle, it was the most secured, and it was surrounded by numerous walls. So you had to really want to get in the keep to get to the keep, because you had to go through dozens of obstacles to get there. First of which being the moat. So the other thing that these places seem to have in common is trying to set up a sense of disorientation, in that I've seen several where once you enter, it's a maze to get to the keep, which makes sense. That would be done on purpose, because really the people that are going to be closest to your villain is the same as the people that would be close to a royal family, and that these would be your most trusted advisors, the people that your villain may not completely trust, but they trust them more than they trust everybody else. So it would make sense to set up a layout that only your most trusted advisors would know. And most villains even put an extra layer in that there is a section of their castle or their lair that only they can get into, that only they know how it's laid out, to protect themselves potentially from any betrayers that they may have. So the other element, I think, outside of security for the way that these castles and lairs are laid up is basically it's showing off. Like, look what I can do. Look how much power I have. Look what I was able to accomplish. So, for instance, Lord of the Rings, I'll use it again because that's one of my favorites. Sauron has an entire land that is his. He has Mordor is surrounded on 3 sides by the Ash Mountains, which are impenetrable, pretty much. There is technically one way in, which is the Black Gate, which is guarded by orcs and trolls and Lord knows everything else. The Pass of the Spider, which is how Frodo and Sam get into Mordor, is guarded by Shelob. And she is the only creature in Mordor who Sauron does not technically command. So once you get in there, you have a land that is literally swamped with orcs who have weapons, who have commanders. And contrary to popular belief, Mordor is not hot. It has volcanic activity, but it's not hot. It's actually described as very cold, which is an environmental hazard because hypothermia is very much a deterrent. If your bad guy has their lair set up in the middle of the Arctic winter, yeah, most people aren't going to try for that. That is actually what caused Hitler's siege on Russia to essentially grind to a halt, was the Russian winter, because his troops were totally unprepared for it. So that's another hazard. But I think also villains like to kind of show what they were able to harness. Like, you know, I was able to harness and build these giant walls. I was able to harness all these armies that are now patrolling everywhere, and there's no secret place you can slip into. So a really popular one, the volcano. My husband actually pointed this out to me, and I think he's right. Most villains have a volcano motif somewhere. And I think that has to do with, I really think actually the movies The Incredibles described it really well when they said they were drawn to power. And I think that's fairly accurate, actually, because a volcano is this explosive, destructive force that will literally, honestly destroy anything in its path. I mean, if unlike the movies show you, if you are caught by lava, by just by, and if it's not the lava, then most of the time the ash will do you in. Toxic fumes will do you in. So I think incorporating a volcano motif is kind of showing off how lethal they are. And the idea that they can harness nature. Because nature in most stories is like this unpredictable, uncontrollable force. Because that's pretty much what it is. I mean, we can predict it to a certain extent, but there is zilch we can do to stop it. If you think about it, we have warnings for tornadoes, we have warnings for hurricanes, we have warnings for fire devils, which, by the way, is a tornado that is on fire, and that is no thank you. But there's really not much we can do about it. Even forest fires, if they get big enough, they will literally create their own weather system. They will feed themselves. So there's not much we can do about them either. So a villain who is essentially showing your hero, you know how destructive nature is. I've tamed it. It's mine. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't think is the point. The point is, it appears that they control it. And that's intimidating. Intimidation, I don't think, should be underestimated. And I think villains who use it are quite intelligent. Because fear, like I've said before throughout this month, fear is an important element that smart villains use well. Because when we're afraid, like I've said before, your adrenaline kicks up. When your adrenaline kicks up, this part of your brain, your frontal lobe, where you do all your reasoning, it doesn't work as well because you're frightened and you're worried about your safety. So if your villain just by presence says, look how powerful I am, look at the damage I can do, look at the horrible things I can do. Psychological warfare. They did it all the time in the Middle Ages. They used to return their prisoners by throwing their bodies over the walls of the castle. And while it did cause disease and things like that, the main purpose was psychological. Look what we've done to your comrades, and look, this is what's going to happen to you too. That effect really damages morale. And when your morale is down, you can't fight or plan as efficiently. So that's one type of the villain lair. The other one, I think, and I don't see it as much, is where the villain lives in like high class luxury mansion, whatever. They're like the rich upper class in their society. But the same symbols still apply. They just aren't as obvious. So while the old fantasy technique would be to surround yourself with like a forbidden land, spells, armies, and whatnot, a rich person may surround themselves with resources. Maybe they have connections to technological companies. Maybe they have connections to high security companies. Maybe they can hire independent assassins. You don't know. But their resource, their main threat is money. That's usually their main resource that they utilize, and they utilize it very well, is money. And especially as in most of these stories where these type of villains show up, there's usually corruption. And in a corrupted state, money is really what gets you places. So you have a villain who is regarded as high upper class. They have money, they have resources, so they have security. And in the same manner, they also have a way of essentially showing off what they can do with their money. You know, here's what I can buy. Here's what has happened to people that have opposed me before. Because you don't necessarily have to have a villain destroy someone physically. And I think in some stories it actually works better if they destroy them psychologically. So if your world takes place in a world where status is extremely important, if you have a villain who can destroy someone's social status, usually by, like I said, utilizing the resources that they control, maybe they have a footing in the government, things like that, that's dangerous because it puts your hero at a disadvantage. And that's really what the villain's lair is all about, is let me show you how much of a disadvantage you are. Let me show you how far above you I am. Let me show you why you shouldn't mess with me. Intimidation. It works. It's been used for centuries, and it's been used because it works. I personally, that's just me personally, I've always been more of a fan of the traditional kind of lair, and I think that's just because I really like quest type fantasy. But I give credit where credit's due. The other type works just as well. I think it just depends on the type of story you're telling. So, depending on what plot elements you need to use is going to depend on where you put your villain. Now, there is the element of a villain that does not have a lair. They kind of jump around, go from place to place. And that one is fun too, but I think I'll address that in a different video, talking about types of villains. So I'll address that maybe tomorrow or the next day. But I just wanted to kind of dig into villain hideouts because I really think they're interesting and they really give a chance, especially as a writer, for you to kind of be really creative and show off ways that your villain can be intimidating and powerful. I can give you guys one example from my work in progress. I'm not going to go into great detail on it though because it's still being worked out and it doesn't really chime in until the second book. But anyway, so the palace of the Queen of the Natula is a palace that is carved out of a mountain, not into a mountain, out of a mountain. And it's literally like by itself in a pillar, and at the very top is the palace itself carved out of the top of the mountain. And there are only few ways in through magic. So it's isolated, it has security to keep people from getting in, and only select few even know how to get in. And that one's actually really fun for me to write because it just has this grandiose hugeness to it. And especially when compared to some of my heroes, because like I've mentioned in some of my videos before, my heroes are children. So this is large and huge and humongous to adults, let alone a little kid. And that's fun. I like having the hero kind of realize, oh crap, when they realize what they're up against. Because not only does it make your villain more intimidating, more threatening, it also serves to make your hero more courageous. Because being faced with something so horrendous and so, how am I going to do this, and choosing to go on and try anyway, then your hero's got major nerves, and I love seeing it. Alright guys, I'm glad you decided to chime in for this video. Like I said, I love talking about villains and settings and things like that. And this one has always been a fun topic for me. So thanks you guys for joining me. I hope to see you guys again next time, and we will have our next Halloween video soon. If you guys enjoy this content, please make sure to subscribe. And as always, give me your comments below because I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. And until next time, have a good one.